Good morning and welcome. Thanks for your patience there for a moment. Again, welcome to Reopening Connecticut Arts Venues Science-Based Safety. I'm Eric Dillner, the CEO of the Shoreline Arts Alliance and the chair of this task force. The mission of our task force is to offer you the opportunity to reopen your arts venues from a public health perspective and provide a listening and sharing platform and to help consumer confidence through science. We've had an extraordinary few weeks visiting innovators in our sector, including New Haven Symphony, U.S. Coast Guard Band, Arts Collective, Iverton Playhouse, New Haven Museum, Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts, and the list goes on. We are so thrilled to be in the position to begin focusing the task force efforts on consumer confidence. Thanks to all the thoughtful and creative ways these venues have taken care to reestablish the arts through the lens of science. Today, our team will share creative ways to move the arts forward and offer DIY plans to find success with your air handling and much more. To date, our webinars have reached over 9,200 viewers in over 14 states and 4 countries. We encourage everyone to attend each of these webinars and follow Shoreline Arts Alliance's YouTube channel and Facebook page for additional information. We encourage you to share this information broadly with all of your colleagues. During the discussion today, let's use the Q&A in Zoom and on Facebook for asking your questions, and reserve the chat for resource sharing, telling your successes, and of course, your moments of clarity. Sten Vermund, the Dean of Yale School of Public Health, and his team are extraordinarily generous with their time, and we ask that you continue to respect their time by sending your questions and needs through the task force members. So let's meet the fantastic folks who are going to help us reopen Connecticut arts venues and keep us safe. I'm pleased once again to introduce to you my co-chair, Sten Vermund. Sten is the Dean of the Yale School of Public Health and holds the Anna M.R. Lauder Chair in Public Health, as well as a secondary appointment in pediatrics in the Yale School of Medicine. As an infectious disease epidemiologist, Sten's research pivoted quickly to focus on the COVID-19 emergency. And today I'm so excited for you to hear about some big news from his world of research. Sten and his wife are deeply fond of Connecticut's cultural arts, and he's pleased to offer his advice and counsel to arts and cultural organizations. Today, we also have Sten's colleague, Crystal Paulit. Crystal is an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences of the Yale School of Public Health. She holds an appointment in the School of Engineering and Applied Science, and her research is focused on understanding our exposure to environmental factors and the impact on health. Crystal is particularly interested in chemical and biological exposures in indoor spaces, so she's perfect for all of our needs. And we're so thrilled to have back with us today Julie Paquette. Julie is the Director of Engineering and Energy Management at Yale University. As a registered professional engineer in Connecticut, she has an extensive experience in the assessment, design, construction, and operation of high-performance building systems, including a broad range of museum, library, performing, and studio arts facilities. Julie's work over the past several months is focused on the implementation of practical improvements to existing mechanical systems in response to the urgent public health needs, and in support of long-term resilience and sustainability in the built environment. Needless to say, folks, we are in great hands today. Sten, without anything else, won't you share a bit more about your team at the Yale School of Public Health and your recent findings? Sten?
Well, thanks, Eric. We have had some excitement at the Yale School of Public Health. Our team, led by Nate Grubaugh and Ann Wiley, have developed a what's called saliva direct approach, which is a procedure that makes testing using PCR for the virus, makes it faster, makes it cheaper, makes it easier without any compromise in sensitivity. And we're working with labs all over the country and all over the world, and certainly all over the state, to try to stand this up to substantially reduce risk, costs of testing, and increase the turnaround of testing for folks wanting to use testing as a tool for reopening. We've also had some extraordinary results from Caroline Johnson's lab. Carolyn is one of Crystal's colleagues in environmental health sciences, and the finding from her lab may give us some fundamental biochemical and molecular understanding of why men do worse than women with coronavirus infection, which they do, and some fundamental insights, and that's now being reviewed by the world's most famous journal, Nature, and we'll see what happens there. But she's already put it out in a preprint so that the scientific community can learn from it even before it goes through peer review. And Crystal's world has gotten complex. Crystal spearheaded a book chapter recently on reopening schools. She's been consulting with the Yale School of Music and doing experiments with the Yale School of Music to get greater insights as to how we can play music absolutely safely, even in the face of a respiratory viral threat. And I could go on and on about Crystal's work. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's interesting. Crystal is an indoor air quality expert. Indoor air quality happens to be one of the most important elements to reduce coronavirus risk. I happen to be a pediatrician and an infectious disease epidemiologist, and that comes in handy when you're dealing with schools because of all those elements. So, you know, we were minding our own business in January as you were all minding your own business, and you were setting up for your spring events. And the next thing you know, we're hit with this terrible pandemic. But without further ado, the focus of today is very much going to be on the air quality agenda. So I'd like to step away and turn it over to my colleagues, Crystal Pollitt and Julie Paquette. But I know you've got some comments, Eric.
Well, Sten, I mean, once again, I'm just in awe of the fortune that we, the arts community, have with you as our leader of our team, to look at the arts and the venues through your filter. Thank you so much for engaging with us and so much. As you said, we've spoken a lot about air quality and specifically natural and mechanical ventilation, and working to create outdoor space indoors with the freshest possible air. So like you said, let's focus some of our effort today on some of the commonly asked questions, one of which is, how do we measure our current air filtration, and how do we gain clarity on what is the best fix? So then we can move into some of Crystal's DIY and cost-effective solutions. So Crystal, let's make sure we are all on the same page by taking us through your updated airflow option slide. In July, we focused on the HVAC half of the diagram. So today, let's give our end users, the folks in the building every day, solutions they can take control of. A little reminder on what we mean by natural ventilation and mechanical ventilation would also be helpful. So Crystal, thanks.
Yes, of course. Eric, do you want to pull up the slide as well if you have that available?
Absolutely.
The visual always helps.
There we go.
So we'll get started with just trying to understand systems and what you can do as a user of your space to just visually inspect and look for practical actions that you can employ to improve ventilation and also filtration within your space. So when thinking about improving the air quality within your venue, the first is really to decide what are the characteristics of your space. Do you have a building HVAC system where you have mechanical air that's being routed through each one of your rooms, or are you just relying on windows and doors, and we call that natural ventilation? So you don't have an HVAC system available. And that's really the key in deciding what are going to be your most accessible and feasible options for reducing potential infection risk from SARS-CoV-2. So this is a diagram where we go through this decision matrix of what's possible. And so like I said, the first step is, do you have HVAC? Do you not have HVAC? So for cases where you do have HVAC, there's a number of different parameters to consider. And what we're trying to do with HVAC systems is trying to bring in as much outside air as possible into your building. So when we think about outside air, we're thinking of it as having very little or none viral material that will pose a risk for infection to COVID-19. So we're trying to maximize that, reduce any parameters that are going to adjust and scale the amount of ventilation that's being adjusted based on occupancy, and that relates to demand control ventilation. So once we've maximized the amount of air that's possible within the system, We then want to think about, if we don't have 100% outside air coming in, how can we then make sure that any air that's being recycled within the space is the cleanest that it possibly can be before it's reintroduced to occupants. And this is where we think about filters that the HVAC system is equipped with. And we want to make sure that the filters are properly installed, so you don't have any gaps that are going through them, because air will always choose the path of least resistance. If there is a hole, a gap, a space, it's going to go through that as opposed to being squeezed through that filter material. So you want to make sure it's properly installed, and also that we have the highest efficiency filter that a system can handle. And not all filters can handle higher efficiency filters, but to have the maximum rating that's possible in there. If you can get a MERV 13 filter, so that rating for the filter type, if that's possible, that's what's being recommended by various bodies to be able to place within your system. The next point of consideration is how much air do you have moving through your space, and that's what we're referring to as an air change rate. So how frequently is the air within a space being replaced with fresh air? There are standards related to this that are released from an organization called ASHRAE. They have a specific standard called 62.1. We'd be happy to share some of those guidelines for the maximum occupancy within that space. We'll go through some targets for different spaces on trying to achieve those. So that really overviews a lot of the mechanical ventilation guidelines. And if those aren't possible, then we turn to how can you just use windows and doors to help promote improved indoor air quality. So really maximizing use of operable windows. They can be incredibly effective, no-cost solutions. Whenever you can open them and you don't have any other options available, they work very well. We'll go through some examples later on within the webinar on how we can then also enhance airflow through the windows by putting a box fan into the window and exhausting air outwards, so we're moving any potential viral material out of the space where occupants are. And then also options for portable air cleaners, and we'll discuss some DIY options for that later. And ultimately, if those aren't available, then moving into another space is probably the best option for the events.
Great, thank you so much, Crystal. So helpful. Okay, so my next question that's asked all the time is, how do we know what our current environment really is? And Sten, when we walk into our various site visits, you often look at me and say, feels good in here, great sign, or something along that lines. What are you feeling when you say that, Sten?
I'm willing to be contradicted by, hold on. Oh, I am unmuted. I'm willing to be contradicted by Crystal on this, but I believe that sometimes when you're in a stuffy room, it's stuffy because the airflow is not good. You know, in other words, it feels stuffy and you don't feel like there's good air exchange because there isn't good air exchange. And so sometimes you walk into a venue and you literally feel the air moving. You literally feel the air being circulated. So it's not scientific, and there's a much better way to do it that the HVAC experts can measure and the building engineers can measure. But you can sometimes identify with the quick and dirty assessment what the dead spaces are in your building. You can go into a room and it feels stuffy and it feels like the air is not moving, and you look around and sure enough, there is no air outflow or inflow duct, and in fact, it is a dead space. And places like that may be amenable to use of box fans that Crystal's going to talk about in a minute, maybe amenable to air purifiers. There are other ways to sort of help us resolve that. Just a little vignette that I've told before. For 3 years at Yale, the summer times in my office have been insufferable. I've had to use fans because building engineers couldn't get the air exchange in my room right. Well, they did a refit of our building related to COVID, and now I have the most comfortable office you could ever imagine. So sure enough, it wasn't being properly ventilated. Now it is being properly ventilated, and I can tell.
That's great. That says it all, doesn't it? So, well, Crystal, what's that?
Thanks for the vote of confidence.
I know. That's exactly that was Julie. Well, Julie, now you're on the spot. Now that you've said that, but Crystal and Julie, is there any way for us to measure this airflow?
Yeah. And actually, before we dive into that, I wanted to comment a little bit more on that feeling of stuffiness.
Okay.
And, when I hear stuffy, I generally think it comes down to one of a couple things. Number one, humidity. You can feel the moisture in the air. That feels heavy. And so, the word that we all go back to is stuffy. Sometimes you step into a space and you can smell the Sharpie from yesterday's meeting, or someone's lunch from the day before, and that air isn't moving through that space. And that immediate feeling that Sten commented on of this feels good, it really is the air movement, right? It's a temperature differential that you can feel immediately in a space and the air moving. So when I step into a space, and I think, does this room feel stuffy? I'm really feeling for humidity. I'm trying to smell things that might be left over, and I'm feeling air movement. So that's always, so really those three things are a good way. And it relates really well to what Crystal is about to talk about, which is, I can feel the air moving. It feels good to me, but am I getting outdoor air into my space? So that's my lead for Crystal.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, Crystal.
Thanks for that, Julie. So Eric, can we go to the next slide?
Sure.
All right, so on that topic, there's been a fantastic document that's being put out by the Harvard School of Public Health from Joe Allen's group. And they go through exactly this question of, do I have enough outdoor space? How do I really quantify the stuffiness to then be proactive about some sort of approach to solve it? So they released this 5-step guide for checking ventilation. It's specific here for classroom spaces, but really it can be applied to any type of space that's being used inside. So Eric, if you go to the next slide, we'll just go through the 5 steps that they have in here. If you search this site here on the Harvard website, we can also put a link in the chat on how to get to this PDF. You can go through all of the details, but really to highlight the 5 steps that are available is to really understand your space. So looking at any space, classroom or other dimensions. So what is the area, and in particular, what is the height of your ceilings? Because that's really going to influence how much mixing you have in there and how much dilution space you have for any viral material that's released into the air. And the second, and following up on understanding your space, is just doing a check in terms of audio visual feel. So are you able to hear the sound of fans? Where are they located? Are there any dead spaces, as was mentioned, within airflow that you might want to be aware of? And these are usually good cues of where you might have some ventilation available or lack thereof. And then you can really get into different ways to estimate the amount of outdoor air you have within your space. They go through 4 methods depending on if you have a naturally ventilated space, a space with HVAC system, different types of HVAC system approaches, and it's a step-by-step guide on the tools that are needed. And even if it's something that you can't perform yourself, it really highlights some questions that you can be asking an HVAC professional if you're concerned about this to be able to address with them. And then finally, most importantly, they suggest some targets. So what is enough ventilation within your space? So there are some guidelines related to these air change rates that were being previously mentioned. Levels of about 3 are on the lower end, and really reaching for targets of 6 air changes per hour is what we're aiming for with a lot of spaces, especially if you are having activities where you're releasing aerosols. So if you have the potential for a lot of vocalization or a lot of people speaking continuously, if they're playing some instruments or singing, that's really where you want to maximize the number of air changes you have per hour. And if you don't have those with available, with your available space as you have it right now, there's a lot of different supplemental strategies that can be put into place to enhance the amount of ventilation and also filtration. And we'll go through some of those options in a moment.
Perfect. Great. That's very helpful. Thank you so much. John Carl from Connecticut Nonprofit Alliance has a follow-up question for you.
Good morning. Crystal, you mentioned ventilation professionals. Are there ventilation testers?
So yes, and I'll let Julie also add to this as well, as because she's been doing a lot of testing on the Yale campus for that. So yes, there are people that can measure the amount of ventilation within your space, and they have the necessary tools to be able to do this in a quantitative manner.
Excellent. And Frank Trevera from Palace Theater in Waterbury, you have another follow-up question.
Morning, everyone. With all these people breathing in a room, et cetera, is there any concern about CO2? Do we need to invest any time, energy, equipment into monitors for such a thing? Is this even a concern?
So CO2 is a really fantastic proxy for giving a real-time, immediate indication for what the level of ventilation within the space is. So if it's you don't have the ability to have someone come out and actually measure your ventilation, there are low-cost CO2 monitors that can be purchased. There are some that have different features. So there are some that are able to log data. So if you wanted to be able to monitor the data over a longer time, especially when you have occupants coming in and out. And there are some lower cost ones that don't log the data. They have different ways of measuring CO2. So if you are looking to purchase one, having one that's labeled as an NDIR or a non-dispersive infrared technology, those are the types of units that you'll want to get. They can be mounted within an indoor space, and they'll be able to then just monitor the amount of exhaled CO2. This relates to SARS-CoV-2 because it's also released as we exhale. So while we're talking, we're speaking, singing, breathing, playing an instrument, CO2 is being released. So ideally, they can be placed within an indoor setting. You want to avoid placing them within dead zones, away from big furniture, and also away from any of your HVAC inlets or outlets. And then mounted at about 1.5 meters, 2 meters, so it represents breathing level of an individual within that space. And you can then monitor how fluctuations within CO2, and if you have very high levels that persist while many occupants are present, then that's probably a good indication that additional ventilation is needed.
And Julie, did you want to tag on to that?
Sure. Yeah, I might add just easily, there's a lot of CO2 monitors on the market. They're relatively easy to get, Amazon, Home Depot, roughly between $100 and $200 a piece. Read the instruction manual so that you calibrate the monitor appropriately to an outdoor baseline of roughly 400 ppm. And sometimes the numbers can fluctuate quite a bit. I mean, you'll see them respond as soon as somebody comes into a room, you'll see it increase, but really you're looking for it to level out, at or below 800 ppm. So, I think I actually have one in my home because it's kind of fun, but, easy to get, easy to have in a space, great information.
Thank you. I love it that you find this fun. We all find this fun, but you're helping us find the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you. So let's just say we don't have good ventilation. What can you do? Can we start with talking about windows first and how effective use of the windows are? I think you gave me a slide for this too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eric. So this again is taken from the Harvard PDF, and I think you have a video there too. So this is where they did an experiment where they took a box of dry ice. So dry ice will release a gas phase, CO2, at room temperature. And so they had a lot of CO2 within the space, and they then said, well, what does it look like in terms of the measurements of CO2 within the space if we let that disperse without any windows open or with windows open and doors open. And that's what's shown in this animation here that Eric's brought up, is to look at the decrease of CO2 over time. If you don't have any windows open, you can see a very slow linear drop, but a very fast drop if you just open your windows. And this is just to show that windows can be very effective, very simple to operate, and no cost.
Excellent. So window fans. Do you think we could take a look at a little closer at some various window fans? And first, maybe we could start with Sten. Sten, I've enjoyed looking at many of them in some of the buildings that we've gone into, and I have a couple of slides if you'd like to talk through those a bit.
If I sound a little distracted, it's because I'm furiously trying to type on the chat.
Thank you for doing that.
Now I'll let Crystal take on a couple of the chats.
Well, you may remember seeing this at New Haven Museum with Margaret Ann over there, and being
so
really thrilled.
This is a classic, well-installed window fan that we saw at the New Haven Museum, and I thought it would be fun for people to see it. It's blocking off the rest of the window. You can see that this is an older building. You can just tell by looking at the window, and it may reflect what some of your venues can do, which is a classic home style up and down window. And what they did was got their building engineer to fit the fan into that block of plywood, and it's pointing out, right? In other words, you're sucking air out of the building. That's what creates negative pressure, and that's what substantially improves air quality. And Crystal has data on this. It's incredible how much how much you can clear the air with one of these $35 box fans. Now it'll cost you a little more to do it as well as they did it, and I would like them to put a little bit of caulking, sort of winterizing around the edges. That would be a good thing, right? Thank you for pointing that out. That would be a good thing to do. Just the simplest thing like you do for your windows in the winter time, less than $10 of material from a store. And that would create a tremendous support. Now, don't worry about air coming into the room. It'll find its way into the room. What you're doing is you're sucking air out. And if you have a favorable time of year, you can use that box fan to enhance the air exchange in a given room. Now, I'll let Crystal and Julie comment. We're not crazy about running the HVAC and the box fan at exactly the same time, because you may actually undermine the work of your HVAC, but I'm not the right person to talk about that. We'll let Julie and Crystal make a comment. But that's a nice example of a box fan which can do wonders in a kind of dead space part of your museum or your performance venue.
Great. And yeah, Crystal and Julie, maybe we'll defer that after we talk about the filtration systems and those things as well. One more, Sten, for you to share is this wonderful shot here that we got at Lisa Matthias Dance Center.
Right. So Lisa had paid a lot of attention to prior webinars, and she had upgraded her HVAC. She had gotten the MERV 13 filters. She had increased the flow rate of the HVAC. She had bought a number of air filtration devices, and she had put these box fans into that's not so much a window, but a garage opening And so there were a few things that I shared with Lisa. I said, you've got a little bit of overkill here. You've optimized your HVAC, and you've got your air filters, and you've got your box fans. So what you can do is when the weather is very friendly, and it's 70 degrees outside, and you want it to be 70 or 68 in your room, you could sort of pull these box fans together, bring the sort of seal them, don't have so much extra space, because it's more efficient if there's tight, like that window that we just showed you. If it's tight, then you're going to have very efficient airflow and creating that negative pressure that's so desirable. But if the weather is not so good, close the garage door there. You can take the box fans out of service and rely on your HVAC and your air filters. Crystal, in a little while, is going to show you a trick to deploy these box fans even when the weather is unfavorable as an internal filtration device. But she's got some pictures to show you in a moment about that, so I won't dwell on it. But that was an example where the sentiment was right, but she needed to tighten these box fans up. She needed to have better sealage around the box fans to maximize the airflow efficiency.
Well, congratulations again, Margaret Ann and Lisa, for following these guidelines and making some good progress there with your space. So thanks for inviting us into your spaces also. We have a follow-up question from Judy Dworin of the Judy Dworin Performance Project.
Yeah, we've had these great examples of box fans, but I'm wondering about overhead fans. When would they be used? And dance studios, performance venues, they're very often there. And is there a preferred angle? Should the angle change?
Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of these spaces are already equipped with ceiling fans. So, can they be useful? I glossed over this when we went through the decision charts, but they were also listed on there. And I had noted that air should be pulled up towards the ceiling, so rotating them counterclockwise to do that. And the rationale for doing that is when someone coughs or sneezes, or they're exhaling, playing an instrument, singing, they're releasing those aerosols, and we want to break up that plume that's coming out of their mouth. And we want to then force that up so it doesn't then lead to then spread around other areas where other people might be exposed. So really just trying to lower the amount of concentration of that viral material and then move it away from another person, especially if they're not able to wear masks depending on their activity.
Thank you so much for that, Crystal. We've had so many folks ask about that. That I'm so glad and often it's not just a dance studio, it's for a performance space or something like that, it's about the audiences, all that. So I think we really needed that question answered. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about air purifiers. We've had many questions about air purifiers and the concerns about the cost. And both the equipment purchase and then the cost of energy to run these devices. And this is the perfect segue into getting into your DIY solutions for that. So I'm hoping that we can now share some of those great ideas you have, but talk up first a little bit about the the cost of energy and those kinds of things.
Yes, of course. Would you like to go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So there was mention about air cleaners or air purifiers. And there are many that are available commercially. They can run anywhere from a couple $100s to a few $100s, depending on the amount of air that they move. So they contain a fan with a HEPA filter. So these are high efficiency filters for removing any airborne particles like you would have for SARS-CoV-2. And they work very well. But the caveat with them is having the budget to be able to purchase them. So there's been a number of designs shared about how to make your own air cleaner, air purifier that you can assemble for $30 to $50 just by going to your local hardware store and purchasing material to do this. So this is one example here of a low-cost air purifier where we've just taken a 20-inch box fan, so you can get this from a Lowe's or a Home Depot. Depending on the brands, they might have different levels of noise because acoustics is something that I know a lot of spaces are interested in. And by simply strapping, connecting a filter onto the front of it, you've now created your own supplemental filtration unit within your space. So pairing the box fan with a similar sized filter, so many common furnace filters are also sized at 20 by 20 inches. We recommend getting a 2-inch filter thickness. They come in different thicknesses. This will allow for improved airflow with this type of design. So when we tested this in terms of sound, the sound rating was about 35 decibels, which is really on the lower end that a lot of spaces hopefully can accommodate and still have some good control. Now, if you're working with a larger space, we've also come up with an alternative design based on recommendations from various indoor air scientists and other aerosol scientists on how we can assemble a larger number of filters together. So having more area that air can travel through, putting less of a strain on the fan so it can operate at a much faster speed and then provide greater filtration within the space. So in this case, we've built a cube out of 5 of these furnace fans because we now have more of them using some lower cost 1-inch filters also works really well. And then again, we've just taped it onto the front of the box fan. So we recommend for all of these units, also for the ones that you purchase commercially, make sure that they're not placed right on the ground. So you want to elevate them off the space so you're not just picking up any debris, dust that's on the floor. So this is one example here of what this multi-filter unit looks like. So in this case here, it's strapped onto a small utility cart. So this was a little cart that I had for my son where I just put a box fan. It's blowing air down, so it's just pinned onto the top of the utility cart, and then you have this cube formation from the 1-inch MERV filters placed on top, and that's simply just put together using some caulking and some white duct tape.
And I'd like to add to this to say that you know, these types of filters, of course, are or filtration units, I should say, are of course commercially available. Although at this size, you're really looking at an investment of $350 up to $1,000. Whereas if you can make something like this yourself, you really get a lot of the benefit with a lot less cost. And obviously you could reuse that box fan in another way down the line. And I particularly appreciate that you can move this on the utility cart. So that's a great feature as well.
Yeah, these are excellent. Thank you so much. And all these diagrams will be on the Shoreline Arts Alliance website in the coming days, so you'll be able to pull those down. So we've advertised for Home Depot, Lowe's, Michael's. We hope all those organizations get it that the arts need a little help right now. A little plug. No. Okay, so Judy McElhone from the 5 Point Center for the Visual Arts has a follow-up question here about these.
Thank you, everyone. This has been so helpful. As you know, we are in the process of renovating the former UConn campus into an art center. So everything you've said here has been very helpful to us. One question I do have is we have some very large rooms with banks of windows. How many windows do we really need to open, is your thought, in order to ventilate those rooms adequately as we balance with our HVAC system? Would it be necessary to open all those windows in a large room?
Julie, do you want to take this one?
Crystal, can you help with that?
So sure, I'll have a go.
Or Julie, yeah.
So I think it really comes down to the number of occupants you have, what you'll be doing within that space to understand what the necessary ventilation is. And I assume if you're planning to open windows, you don't have an HVAC system within the space, and that would really be the initial guide in picking which option you choose. But I'll let Julie elaborate.
Sure, and I'll add to that. If you have the opportunity to work with an engineer on this, ASHRAE 62.1, which is the standard that Crystal referenced earlier today, does outline a very specific approach to understanding ventilation rates based on window size and window opening and number of windows and placement of windows in a room. So if you have that opportunity, that's great to do a real assessment. Otherwise, the simple way I think of it is, ideal placement of windows would be across a room. You might be dealing with a single wall of windows, in which case you want to have a minimum of 2 open.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, John Carl from Connecticut Nonprofit Alliance, if you could help us move into our next little topic with your questions about masks.
Yes, thanks. We've been talking about space and rooms, but we each have the option to filter our own air by using masks. And we hear different questions about that, including how should a mask be worn? Do we need to cover the nose? Are there better masks than others? Should we require specific masks and ban any other types of masks? What's the best way to work with masks?
That is a fantastic question. And there's been so much amazing work that has come out in the last couple months about masks, better understanding materials and how to wear them, and especially ones that would be applicable for those playing instruments or singing. So first off, your question was covering the nose. Yes. So if you're breathing through your nose, you are also it should also be covered. So it should be covering the nose and the mouth. Have a good seal around your face. If there is a seal, like I said before, a lack of seal there, just like when we're talking about filters within an HVAC system, air will always choose the path of least resistance. So if you have a gap between your nose, make sure that is covered up. With my glasses, I know that's my my first test to see if there's a good seal there, because my glasses will get fogged. And then also similarly making sure that there's enough material that covers around your chin as well. There's a number of different materials that are better choices than others. And I recommend going to the site from John Volkins at Colorado State University that did a number of testing for the state of Colorado for different material choices. And what he's shown here are results for a number of different mask materials that have been tested and how well they perform for different sizes of particles. So what we're looking for here with this graph that's shown, and it's an interactive plot within this website, which is a lot of fun to play with, is that for different sizes of particles, some of the masks will work better than others. So on the left end, we have very small size particles, and then at the right, we have much larger. And then along the y-axis is their collection efficiency. So ideally, a high-performing mask that's able at collecting particles across the range of sizes where we might have virus expelled, we want a mask that has a line across the top of this plot here. So this is an example of the masks that he tested related to singing masks that are available on the market. And you can see that some of the masks perform better than others. This is important when choosing your different mask designs. Another aspect that he's highlighted here is the breathing resistance, to the breathability of the mask. And that's shown in this bottom table that Eric secluded on this slide. So obviously for singing and wearing during different activities, we want to have more breathability, and you can see that there's a range of different breathing resistance offered by different masks. So that's another choice to then add on to your mask selection.
Yeah, and Crystal's right. This is a very fun site to go to. You should check it out, and because you can pick different kinds of masks and bring them up on the screen. It's very interesting. So Sten, if I could pull you away from your typing away and answering questions for the folks who are needing specific, I thought we should talk about when we combine the mask usage, social distancing, and air filtration. We can accomplish an awful lot in the studio and during a performance. In our travels, we've seen a lot of creative ways to accomplish your science-based goals and effectively achieve artistic goals in various sectors. So I thought we could again share some of the great ideas that we are seeing out in the community, and let's go back to the world of dance because it's a fun world. Sten, do you want to walk me through a couple of these?
Well, you said it. It's a fun world, and I've enjoyed immensely what I've learned from all of our artists and artist managers in various venues around the state. Honestly, I go to these things theoretically as the guy who's going to give advice, but I'm like a sponge. I'm learning from all of you, all the creative elements that you've managed. So one approach that we've seen in the East Connecticut Ballet, we saw it at Lisa Matthias's Dance Center and elsewhere, was use of tape on the floors to guide dancers as to how to kind of have a space that they stay within. And it also helps guide choreography, which we've been recommending to the choreographers that they think about dance moves in a sort of a symmetry, almost like birds in a flock. You've all seen the birds pivot together. And imagine if the birds were physically separated and they were pivoting together, that sort of thing, where we can retain physical separation, but we can still train our dancers in complex choreography, but trying not to do parabolas, trying not to have them all over each other and breathing on each other, because that's what we're trying to avoid. And the taping of floors for younger dancers and having them be color coded. So I think it was at East Connecticut Ballet where we actually saw them color code for different children and different functions, and they were going to give the instructions on which color to stay with. I mean, it was quite extraordinary, the amount of creativity. And Lisa's Dance Center, which also serves children, had these boxes in which the dancers were going to be retained, and then she was going to be making efforts to do this sort of flock of birds choreography. So I feel like there's a lot of creative thinking that can be applied to make it easier on the dancers, not to befuddle them and make it complex, but to sort of systematize their space and thereby make it a lot easier to follow directions.
Yeah, so the dance world's doing a great job of this, and so are our folks who are starting to think about that private instruction. While we were at the Arts Collective, we were discussing, how do we begin instruction again, and using the lobbies is a great way to do that. Also can demonstrate how much space you can get between the artist and the teacher. So Sten, this was a great moment if you want to share that with us.
Well, the piano studio in the Hartford Arts Collective was in a very small room, and we weren't quite sure that it was optimally sort of filtered. It was hard for me to tell, honestly. But the leaders of the Arts Collective had made that question moot because they had planned to migrate the piano teaching to this very large venue. It was essentially a common area that wasn't being used for big gatherings at the present time. So they had moved one of the pianos into this common area. And what I recommended was that they seat the instructor about 6 feet away, and this instructor masked would come over and hand hygiene, and would come over and guide a piano player as necessary, show them the fingering, and then retreat to their 6-foot distance. And as long as hand hygiene was reasonably established and the piano was cleaned at the beginning and the end of the lesson, the pianist and the teacher were masked. the risk could be kept extremely low, and yet the piano teaching could go back to face-to-face. Of course, we're fine with Zoom piano teaching. Piano teachers all over one of my best friends from childhood teaches piano in Seattle, Washington, and he's been doing the best he can with Zoom piano teaching. But in the Hartford Arts Collective, a lot of the kids in the neighborhood don't have pianos. So to Zoom teach when the child doesn't have a piano is not practical. So the Arts Collective wanted to get back to business as usual and also enable the children to practice at this. So these were some of the suggestions we made.
That's great. So let's dig a little bit deeper into wind instruments, and I think Frank can help us do that question.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. Sten, to your point about piano players, the nice part is that they can wear masks while they're practicing, and so there's hygiene there. Unfortunately, woodwind brass musicians, I don't believe, have the luxury of wearing a mask. So, I mean, when we're looking at spacing and now you're projecting, are there concerns? Is there a distance recommendation that for those instruments and individuals playing woodwinds and brass instruments?
Turning that one over to Crystal because she's been doing a very deep dive in this topic.
Crystal, you're on.
So was a really nice study that was recently released as a preprint from the University of Minnesota that looked at aerosol emissions from different types of instruments. So those with reeds and knots, and then also different flows through the instrument, and then compared if they posed a greater or lower risk compared to just someone being in a room unmasked and breathing or speaking. Because we know that even when we speak, when we breathe, we're releasing some aerosols. So shown here are a range of different instrument types. And the measured number of particles that was released as compared to breathing. That's the range of it shown in green, and then the range of aerosols released from speaking. So you can really nicely see that comparison with each one of those orange dots for each one of the instrument types. So really concerned about instruments like the clarinets, the bass trombone, the oboe, or trumpets that were found to release higher amounts of particles as well. I've listed here the website in which you can find the full description of the sites, but this was a very nice summary figure that we were able to adapt from this article.
Yeah, this is great. So just folks, it's 10:55, and I know that we had a little bit of technical issues at the beginning. Just so that if you want to choose to stay or go, I'm going to just give you a little preview. We're going to talk a few minutes about instruments specifically, some spacing, voices in studios, and this 6, 10, 12, 15 feet thing that keeps being passed around a bit. And then also, if we can, we're going to talk about some solutions. So we only have a couple of minutes. But we're going to try to, if it's okay, Crystal and Julie, to spend a couple more minutes past that. Will that work for you too? Yeah, we're good. Okay, so our next question actually is Darren from Flock Theater. Can you help us lead into the next area here?
Sure. I mean, you already briefly touched upon that, the 12, 15, and this graph really does help us understand why we need musicians to be 12 feet apart when performing, as well as 12 feet away from the audience. Are there other strategies to reducing risk for that as well?
So we can share this design of masks that continues on from our previous discussion of masks. So this is a really nice design where there's a flap covering over top of the opening that would be open where the instrument can be inserted. There's also the options for bell coverings, and this has been something that has been explored by a study being led by Shelley Miller at the University Colorado Boulder, where there's a covering with also a MERV 13 filter that's placed inside that's being found to be very effective at reducing the amounts of aerosol release, especially from those high risk instruments. Eric, if you go to the next slide, I'll just briefly show a figure that also summarizes some other control approaches for indoor spaces. So this is adapted from the book chapter that was mentioned earlier on, that was written with Sten and also with Julie earlier this summer. All of these figures are available on the websites that we can share, that you can review in detail, but there's a number of different options we've gone through with regard to the HVAC system or natural ventilation, as well as the supplemental filters that can be deployed in these spaces.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we'll also share this. It's a bit to take in right now. We'll take a look. Darren, you want to follow that up with a couple of questions?
Sure. Yeah, I see in this image that's up in front about physical barriers. Do shields help in the studio and between musicians?
So depending on the size of the barrier and the type of instrument that is being played, they can provide some control for these larger ballistic type of droplets that are being released. With regard to the smaller aerosols, they provide absolutely no control whatsoever. These aerosols will navigate around the barriers and then disperse within your larger space. So that's where we're looking for ventilation, and then just introducing outdoor air that's not going to have any viral material or filtration techniques to remove it from the air. So this particular design from a studio that Eric's shown here really is not going to be effective for a number of different types of applications where aerosols are concerned. And if you are seeing spaces that are advertising use of this type of setup, there's some key questions to ask as well about the space to make sure that you have the safest type of environment possible.
Excellent.
So just to follow up, because we were talking about musicians, so with singers, shields or no shields, is there a difference that you would employ if you were dealing with just singers versus musicians?
So with respect to singers, I would much prefer to have some sort of other type of control around the singer, because they will be reducing a high number emission of aerosols that will not be reduced in terms of their concentrations in the air by just simply having a barrier.
Crystal, Sten had to step away, but I want to ask this question from the Atlanta Opera. Kylie Saunders from the Atlanta Opera, she's their risk mitigation coordinator, and she asks, when those aren't able to wear masks consistently, like singers, wind and brass musicians, should they get tested? What kind of test? PCR rapid test, nasal virus test? Can you help inform them on that, or is that something we need to pass along to Sten?
So Sten would be great to provide the response for that, but if it is possible to undergo testing, that would always be an indication in that point in time of them not being infected.
Yeah, great. So I'm gonna skip ahead here. We pulled a few, Sten, actually, we pulled a few of the regulations off of the Connecticut website and highlighted a few things to demonstrate that it is confusing and challenging to try to figure out what your indoor events and outdoor events, what is required. And after Sten and I spent a good bit of time talking about this, we realized that if you want to just boil it down to the best case scenario and above a regulation, is think of 12 and 12. If you have the capacity to stay 12 feet away, then in any instance, that's your best bet. If you want to go to the regulations and figure out when you can be 6 feet away, that's fine. But really, when we're talking performers, ideally getting as much space from you and the audience, as well as you from another performer, is key. Crystal, I know you've talked about this as well, but that I'm kind of filling in here for what Sten would say in terms of looking at a space like this. We thought here's your easiest way to look at it. Indoor venues, 12 feet away from each other, 12 feet from the audience, wearing masks, no vocalists right now, and 25 people are allowed. And when we're in an outdoor venue like some of we've visited here, again, staying that distance would be greatly helpful. Anything else you want to add to that, Sten or Julie? No, we're good. So our last little slide here is about disinfectants and how you determine what is best in your world. And there's quite a bevy of information here. So Crystal, do you mind walking us through this slide, and then we'll wrap up the day?
Yes, of course. I can briefly mention this. So this is an EPA website that summarizes approved disinfectants from their list N that can be used against SARS-CoV-2. It's a great site that summarizes a number of different products, listing their active ingredients, and also the company name, product name, that you can compare against some of the products that you have currently available and ones that you can be looking at purchasing. Also, what's highlighted here is the contact time, so how long it needs to remain on the surface. So that's something that you should always take into account. And Eric, if you just click one more, there is an advanced search option here that lets you then screen from the incredibly long list of different disinfectants in terms of saying, I only have a short amount of contact time that's feasible for my disinfectant protocols, different surface types, because I know that there's different dance floor types that you want to be more vigilant of what you put on. And as well as the uses. So are you having a lot of kids around or people that might have a respiratory irritation that you want to be aware of? So that's also another useful way that you can screen different disinfectants that might be more applicable to your space than others.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Again, I want to thank Julie so much for coming back today to join us, and Crystal for all your great guidance in all of this. And of course, Sten for introducing us to all of you and getting us all on the same team. This is really remarkable. I want to put a plug in for October 8th will be our next webinar. It's a shorter time between now and then. We encourage you to, if you didn't get a question answered today, or if something comes up in the next week or so, send me an email, send eric@shorelinearts.org, or any of our task force members an email with your questions. This is how we formulated today, as we looked at all the questions that we've collected and tried to answer them to the fullest. Obviously, there's never enough time in this hour, as hard as we try to get it all out. But again, I want to thank you all for looking at your venue, looking at your artistic endeavor through the lens of science, and looking to www.shorelinearts.org for past webinars, and for we're starting to create some videos for you, also of sites that we visited, and we're hoping to do much more of that in October, November, and December, of getting you even more of that kind of information. So looking forward to see you all in person one of these days, but for now, we have to enjoy the time we're together with the sun out and all the good things that are happening. So I wish you all the best, and please be in touch. And again, thank you, our friends at Yale School of Public Health and our wonderful task force. Have a great rest of the day and enjoy your weekend. I think it's right around the corner. Take care. Bye-bye.